53022 and 53021.
We are back on record with all of our parties and attorneys. Mr. Castleberry, we look forward to your next witness.
Your Honor, we call Tanya Zuvers.
You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
There's a step here, be careful. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. Could you please state your name for the record?
Tanya Zuvers,
Could you spell your name?
TanyazUvers.
And what city do you live
Morenci?
in? And is that in Lenawee County, Michigan?
Yes,
How long have you lived in Prince?
my whole life.
How old are you today?
58.
Part of the record. I'm going to take you back in time, Tanya, to when you met John Skelton and married John Skelton. When did you marry John Skelton?
September of 02.
And did you have children with Mr. Skelton?
Yes, I did.
And what were their names?
Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner.
And is that order that you just told me, is that their
Yes,
progressive?
yes.
At some point, these three children, Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner, could you describe Andrew for us?
Andrew was my smart as a whip. Wasn't a computer or video game that he could not conquer. I want to say he was probably around 4 or 5 and he was playing a video game and the girls had friends over and he did something on this video game and one of the friends said, "Whoa, wait a minute, I've been playing this game forever. I didn't know it did that. Show me how you did that." So here's this little 4-year-old showing this teenager how to play this video game. And so he was
Smart.
very smart. They all three were very smart. I'm
And we're not here to determine who's the smartest, but
No.
I want a little bit of a description of each of the children.
Sure.
What about Alex?
He was very inquisitive. If he could take it apart and put it back together, he was happy. He loved to be friends with his sister's friends. They were his girlfriends, he liked to call them. He was going to be my ladies' man, I do believe. But fascinated with cell phones. Like we always joke that someday he would be a cell phone programmer or builder or something like that because he was so into how does it work and that, you know, he just thought that was neat.
Yes. About Tanner.
Tanner's my baby. He had been 5 for 1 month when they went missing. Had just started in big school, was so excited to be in big school like his brothers. He was still had that little babiness to him. But he could tell stories and he could tell them and you would believe him because he would tell stories that were almost believable. And you're kind of going, I don't know. And then he would go, I'm just messing with you. And you're going, how do you do this? You know, but yeah.
Safe to say they were all pretty sharp children.
Yeah, they were. And they were each other's best friends. They were, very rarely did they fight. They were, but they were only like a year and 11 months apart, each of them. And so they were just built-in best friends.
Right. Now, we're gonna get into some things that are not so happy. That is, at some point, the marriage of John Skelton started to have problems. When was
September 13th of 2010, when he signed my sons out of school, telling the school that he was taking them on a family vacation to Florida that I had no idea was happening and was not invited to be a part of.
Were you guys still together on that day?
Yes, we were.
And what did you do in response to that?
My first call was to talk with a police officer. It happened to be Chief Larry Weeks is who came. He told me that he would call John and see if he could get John to come to the police station and we could sit and talk. And while we were waiting for him to come to the police station, my daughters, who were older, both adults,
These are not children with John Skelton, correct?
correct, they are not children with John Skelton, they are from my first husband.
Okay.
They came to Adrian on my behalf and met with an attorney and found out that the only way to prevent John from taking the children was, or for me to get custody of them, that I needed to file for divorce. And I said, well, do whatever you have to. In the back of my mind, I had always heard, if they take them out of state, you have a hard time getting them back, and I didn't know any of that. So I'm like, do what you have to do to get me custody.
Okay.
And we'll cross the next bridge when we get to it. I don't want him taking them out of state until we've had time to discuss this further.
Right.
So when he came to the police station, I said to him, I said, so how long do you plan on being in Florida? He said, I don't know, 3 weeks, a month, I don't know. I'll put him in school down there if we're gonna be too long. And I said, well, you realize to enroll them in any school, you have to have birth certificates, you have to have social security numbers. You don't have any of that. And so we talked. I said, we can go home. I can find that information for you. Just kind of playing his hand for a little bit, just to see if I could get him to hold off. So we went to the house and I looked, pretty much found all the paperwork I needed right away, but I still had not heard from my daughters that everything had been signed and filed. So I was kind of holding off, and I don't even know how long we were at the house. And he come out of his he had a room where his computer was, and he came out and he started yelling at me. And he said, you've been lying to me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, apparently when he decided to take them, he had made an appointment with an attorney and was going to consult. he claims he was just going to see what he could legally do about taking them to Florida. And ironically, he had the appointment with the same attorney that I had already retained. And that attorney called him and told him that they couldn't represent him because I had retained him. And so he started yelling and saying that I was lying and whatever. That he said, I'm out of here, I'm taking the boys with me. And he started yelling at the boys to get in the van. And Tanner was behind me, so I was able to keep him. And the other two were crying, and they got in the van because their dad got to them. He was in front of me going out of the house, and he made them get in the van, and he ended up taking off, and he made it to Florida with them.
Okay. What happened next?
So, my mom, my youngest daughter, and I left for Florida on a Wednesday. We drove all night. We got into Jacksonville around noon. We went to the police station with my papers that.
Now these papers, you had gotten an ex parte custody order. From
Correct.
Florida, is that right?
Correct.
And so you took that paper.
I took that paperwork with me and I said, what can you do? And everything was lined up for us. I think that officer walked us across the street to the courthouse, told us exactly what department we needed to go to. We went there, showed the lady, this is what we have. We need to have this turned into Florida verbiage. And we picked that up the next day. And around, I think I want to say it was around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It was a Friday. I called the sheriff's department. I said, I have this order and I need someone to serve it. And they knocked on the apartment door where he was staying, brought Andrew and Alexander out to me, and we left. But we had to stay in Florida for the weekend because the judge wanted to talk with both John and I before she allowed us to come home.
Now you've thrown out different days of the week, like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
I know, and I
So it's okay, but I want to make clear for the court that, you did give a date to start. That was September 13th. And all of those days that you just referenced, the Friday was September 17th. So it's right away. There's no
Right.
delay in this.
right. It was all that same week.
I mean, he left with the kids. You got an ex parte order the next day. The next day, you're on the way to Florida. Is that right?
Correct, on Wednesday.
You get there, you are immediately going to the court to get the order enforced, correct?
Yes,
And now you're to the point where you have to come back on Monday, which would have been September 20th.
right.
What did the judge say?
Well, we initially I was just gonna go in the courtroom by myself. And we were sitting in the hotel room and my mom and I were talking and we decided we probably ought to find an attorney. And maybe we should do that. We're in a strange town and it's huge.
You're talking about Jacksonville, Florida.
Jacksonville, Florida. And I don't even remember how we chose this attorney. I think we just opened the phone book and pointed because they actually had phone books back then. We went and we met with this attorney. He met me on Monday, the 20th. He met me at the court and he and I went in and John showed up with an attorney.
Okay.
And the first thing out of their mouth was, my history. I had been in trouble. And so they brought that up. And the judge in Florida, and I cannot remember her name,
It's okay.
she went into her chambers and called up here and talked with Judge Noe. And their decision between the two of them, they both were in agreement that we jointly bring them back to Michigan together. And then once we got to the state line, then the custody agreement that Judge Noe had signed became effective,
Which gave you,
which
Full
gave
custody
me
of the
full
children.
custody of the boys.
so you get back to Michigan. And then on the next day would be September 21st. You're back in Michigan.
I think we got back on the 21st, like late.
But you didn't go home when you, what I say is you were living at Congress Street
Right.
before you left. When you came back, where'd you go?
I moved to my mom and dad's house with the boys
Okay.
for a couple weeks. And then I found I had a house I was living in with them.
So you get back to Michigan and you go to your parents' house, but you realize you don't have your stuff, right? Did you go back to Congress Street to retrieve your belongings?
We did, and I moved out, you know, what I needed for the boys, and moved out necessities. And then once I got the house, then we kind of split up some of the furniture.
Was there an argument over a curio cabinet?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So I was living in the Congress Street address, and before I left to go to Florida, we moved the curio cabinet out because at that point, I'm trying to remember. Anyways, we moved the curio cabinet out, and when John got home, when we got back from Florida, he flipped out that the curio cabinet was gone. He called me up. He's like, "Where's this at? What did you do with it?" I said, "That was mine. You gave that to me as a housewarming gift when we bought the house." And he's like, "I paid for that. That's mine." Okay, we moved it back.
This is the same curio cabinet that was found smashed to pieces.
Yes, sir.
So you're back in Michigan. You get the boys back in school.
I did.
Did you get them into counseling?
I sure did.
Okay. What happened next? Did you start a discussion with your attorney about parenting time? And how
We did, and when I think back and I look in my papers, we had dates, but we never made it to those dates to get things finalized through the courts because boys disappeared.
But in your discussion with your attorney, did you guys, and I know John Skelton had an attorney as well, is that right?
Correct.
And so in the discussions between your attorneys, did you work out some Thanksgiving parenting time?
We did. We worked out some parenting time. I had agreed to allow him to have half of the Thanksgiving vacation. And then I would get them back on Black Friday
And what time were you supposed to go back?
between 3 and 4 o'clock. I don't remember the exact time.
But if I said 3 o'clock, would that be?
Yeah,
So Thanksgiving's always on a Thursday. Did you have a phone call with John on Wednesday night?
I may have.
Do you have any recollection of arguing over him telling the children that you went to jail?
I remember, I know that I had a conversation with him on that Monday night, I believe it was, when the boys came home and told me. I called him and he tried to say that they overheard him talking on the phone. And that he didn't mean anything by it, that they were listening and not where they weren't supposed to be or something. And I said, why are you even having conversations with someone on a phone like that when you have the boys with you? Why would you even do that?
So the kids asked you.
They told me that daddy said that I went to jail.
I assume you were upset.
Oh, just a little.
So he then takes the boys for the Thanksgiving holiday.
Correct.
And where did you spend Thanksgiving?
I went to my sister's house in Kunkel, Ohio. To do our normal family get together, make crafts and have fun.
And did John try to contact you that day?
I think so. Yeah,
And did you talk to him?
not till that evening.
So you didn't want to be bothered
Well,
Thanksgiving?
no,
There was
I
no
mean, if it's-
messages.
if it's an emergency, you can call me, but you don't need to keep texting me and blowing my phone up. You're supposed to be spending time with your sons.
So later in that afternoon, did you eventually have a conversation with him?
We did talk.
What'd you talk about?
I honestly don't remember. I'm sure I said something about blowing my phone up, and then the whole having to tell the boys, and I know that we had a fight on that phone that night. And I had told him, because he had asked me if I ever thought we could get back together, and I said, no, I don't think we can after what's happened this week. I don't know how I could.
And you think this was Thanksgiving evening?
Yes.
So what is your next contact with John?
I think I texted him either Friday morning, Friday early afternoon, wanted to know if I could pick the boys up earlier than the 3 o'clock.
And why did you want to pick them up earlier?
My dad and I were gonna take the younger grandchildren and go see if we could find clothing, apparel for my nephew's football team. He was playing in the state football finals at
He
Ford
played for-
Field.
He played for Hudson.
He played for Hudson.
Okay.
And so we were gonna go see if we could find them Hudson Tiger sweatshirts, because we only have Morenci Bulldog sweatshirts at our house. So, and the boys were so excited. My dad would talk to them about going to watch this game, and that we were gonna be inside and we didn't have to wear coats. They just couldn't understand that, because every football game they'd ever gone to was outside and it was cold. So they were excited, and so we thought that would be kind of fun to take and go find orange and black clothes.
That's it. So what was John's response?
He said, well, we're not home right now. We went to my friend's house. We're north of Jackson. I don't know when we'll be home. I said, well, just keep in touch with me and let me know. And so we left it at that. Well, then I saw movement at his house. And
Now, let me stop you for a second.
I
You
have to
say
say
you
how
saw-
I saw movement
There you go.
out my kitchen window.
So where you were staying,
Where I was staying, between the neighbor's tree and house and across the empty lot, I could see his driveway.
okay,
I saw a vehicle pull in his house, and I saw 2 people come out and get in the car and leave. And oh, that's kind of weird. So I messaged him. I'm like, hey, are you home? And he's like, no. And then that's when he tells me that actually the boys aren't with me. I was home. The boys are with my friend. She's bringing them home at 3 o'clock. I'm on my way because I fell off the ladder. I'm going to the hospital. I don't know, I hurt my foot. I said, okay. And I knew he was doing some house remodel or something. So I didn't think anything about that he fell off the ladder.
Those two people, was that Kelsey Burrowski?
I found out later that it was Kelsey Borowski picking him up to take him to the hospital.
And who is Kelsey Burrowski?
She would be his cousin's daughter.
So she's taking John to the hospital?
Yes.
So, 3 o'clock comes. Are there any kids?
No,
4 o'clock comes.
nothing. And my attorney had told me that, he said, now right at 4 o'clock or 4:01, you don't need to be calling right away to report them, but I know you're gonna. He said, you gotta give them a little leeway or whatever. And I said, no, at 4:01, I'm calling because something's not right. So I called and I was told that Renzi's officer was
Who'd you call?
911.
Okay.
Renzi's officer is not available, but we will have him get into contact with you when he gets back to town. Couple phone calls later, still not available. So my dad and brother-in-law take a drive and they find Renzi's officer. And he said, it was Officer Hillard. He said, well, they told me to just get a hold of her later tonight. He goes, I didn't know it was right away. And so then they explained what was going on and he came right over. And that's when he went in the house to do a welfare check and found mass destruction.
So were you with Officer Hillary when he?
I was not. I was, my aunt and uncle lived up the street, and so I went to their house, just because we all just had a bad feeling.
Okay.
And, I made the decision I didn't want to be there if
Something bad.
something bad was happening. So
So when the police went to enter this home, the home, was the back door wedged?
yes,
So you,
when my sister and I went there and we kind of were walking around the house to see if we could see in, the only place we really could see in was the back door. And I still had a key for it, but I couldn't get the door open. We noticed that he had taken a 2x4 and wedged it against the door and against the steps that went up into the dining room so that you couldn't get in the house.
so did the police have to force their way in?
I understand that they did, yes.
What happened next?
He went through the house, did not find the boys.
Now, at some point,
At-
you found out that John had tried to commit suicide.
Yeah, and that's what I was just trying to think. Because I remember, I'm pretty sure I made that phone call for mom and dad, so I must have went back to my mom and dad's house. And I called to Fulton County Health Center and I asked to speak to the nurse taking care of him. And the nurse, he said, well, are you two still married? And I said, yes, we're still married. I filed for divorce. And he said, well, technically you're still his wife, so I'm going to tell you. John is here because he tried to kill himself. And that was the first I heard that.
Okay.
And I said, okay, does he have 3 children with him? And I explained to them, you know, my sons we can't find them. They're not at the house. John had them, claims there's a woman that had them, but there's nothing. And he said, no, ma'am, there are no children here with him.
And did you relay this information to the police?
Yes.
And what did they do that you know of?
I know that Officer Hillard went down to Fulton County. And then pretty much the next thing that I heard, or that I can recall, Chief Weeks called and wanted to have a sit down, him and I. And I want to say it was like 1 a.m. or something. And so, one of my sisters and I and my dad went to the police station to sit down. Chief Weeks said that, this is, we have the Amber Alert, and in another couple hours, this is not gonna look like Morency's police station because we have people coming in from all over
To look for.
to look for your sons and find out what John did.
Now, over the next, I know this is difficult, and if you need to take a break, you just let me know, okay? And the court will, I think the court will understand. Over the next several days, there were obviously multiple search parties that were put out. Are you aware of that?
I was vaguely.
How were you getting updates?
Pardon?
How were you getting updates? on what was going on?
There was an FBI agent that was assigned to come to the house periodically with updates. And there was also, I'm not gonna remember exactly what her title was.
Okay.
But she was kind of there beside me pretty much through daytime hours.
Like victim services?
I know she was a doctor of psychiatry or something.
Okay.
And so she was just there with us and if I had questions or if we needed something, and she would help to kind of understand after the agents would leave and if I had questions about what they told us or that type of thing.
So the children were on some medication.
2 of them.
Okay, who was that? Which two?
Alexander and Tanner both had asthma and had daily pill that they had to take, and then they also had rescue inhaler and a breathing machine if things got really bad. And in this fall, it was
Is the breathing machine a nebulizer?
yes.
And did you find out at some point that that medication was still at the house on Congress Street?
Yes.
Did you also find out that the coats and boots of the children were given to John Skelton's aunt?
I did not know where they found them. I know that they came to the house to have me identify that that was their stuff, but I never knew where they found them.
Did you know that their toothbrushes were also?
No, I did not know about the toothbrushes.
You've learned that since.
Yes,
You learned about the curio cabinet being destroyed.
I saw that because they did take me to the house. They said, we know you didn't live here, but it hasn't been that long since you've lived here and you might be able to point out things that might not be obvious, except that everything was destroyed.
Now, there was a suicide note that was written to you. You aware of that?
I know there was one written, I've never seen it.
Were you told about
Yes.
it? In these updates, were you being told about the lies that John was telling about the different scenarios of where children?
I
could
don't
be?
think really in the beginning right away. I know it's just, that time was so foggy for me.
I understand.
Because I felt like I was living somebody's nightmare.
It's okay. We only want you to talk about what you remember.
Yeah, and
Okay. Remember in our conversations, we don't want to guess.
Right,
We only want to talk about what you know,
correct.
okay? At some point, and this was not very long after November 26, 2010, the FBI came to you and told you that your children are probably not alive.
Correct.
Do you remember that? Did you want to believe it? Do you want to hold out hope that they were alive?
And I did for quite a while.
So at some point, this case gets turned over to the Michigan State Police. You have to say yes or no.
Yes,
And you meet Detective Sergeant at the time, Jeremy Brewer.
yes, I did.
And I think you and Mr. Brewer became very close. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I think you had many in-depth discussions with Mr. Brewer about what happened in this case. Is that right?
Yes,
And at some point, you knew that your children were no longer alive.
correct.
Do you remember when that was?
I don't remember the exact moment. I think it came on slowly in that logically, I said from day one, my sons are smart. If my sons are out there in the world with someone they don't know, one of them, because the three of them work together very well, one of them, and more than likely it would have been Alexander. He was my more vocal, social. Would just tell the person next to them, this isn't my mom or dad. And I know that if you call this number, my mom will answer. And
In fact, they knew how to call 911
they did.
because they'd done it, correct?
I found that out.
You know who killed your children?
John Skelton.
Is there any doubt in your mind that John Skelton killed your children?
There is no doubt in my mind.
Is there any doubt in your mind that John Skelton killed your children on November 26th, on or about November 26, 2010?
No, there is no doubt.
You know, if your children were alive, they would have found you.
Yes, they would have.
So today they would all be adults, correct?
Correct.
So any explanation that you've ever been told or heard about why John Skelton would have hidden it? They're adults today.
Correct.
They could walk through that door right now,
Wish they could.
but they can't. Why is that?
John killed them.
I know a lot of people have asked questions about why are you doing this? And you and I have had some long discussions about that. We talked about a headstone. And I know that one of the things you wanted to make clear to the court is that it's important to you that you want to be able to put a date on that headstone. Is that right? And is that date November 26, 2010?
Yes.
You're asking the court to declare what you know happened, that John Skelton killed your children on November 26, 2010. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you think this shows respect to the children that we are doing this?
Yes, it does. Because their dad showed them no respect. and I shouldn't even say their dad, John Skelton showed them no respect. Because any loving father would not have done what he did. And I owe them the respect that we may not have their bodies, but they're still, their life still meant something, and there is a place to go.
They deserve a death certificate.
They do.
And I'm proud of you and the courage you've shown.
Thank you.
I have no further questions at this time.
Go ahead, Ms. Stang.
Hi, I know you
Hello.
testified that the boys would all be adults now, but can you tell us exactly how old Andrew would be today?
Andrew would be 20. I'm gonna get it wrong because it's 25, but he would be 23.
Okay, and what about Alexander
He would be 21,
and Tanner?
and Tanner would be 19.
Okay. Earlier, you testified that you didn't want to be present at the time that the house was searched by Officer Hilliard on November 26th of 2010 in case they found something. Did you have that initial gut feeling on that day at that time that the boys were no longer alive?
I don't know that I had the initial gut feeling, but something told me that this wasn't just a case that a friend, as John Skelton told me, had the boys. When the door was wedged shut and we couldn't get into the house, that's just not normal. People don't do that. And so I think in the back of my mind, I was afraid that we were gonna find 3 bodies in there. And I didn't want to be there for that.
You've heard some testimony today about the children and passports, and it sounds like none of the law enforcement were 100% sure on that question. So can you answer that question of whether the
They
children
do
had-
not have passports.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And over the years, what all did you personally do to help attempt to find the boys?
Oh my goodness. We, first off, social media sharing, missing flyers, aiding with age progression through National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Any interview that I could do, we did a story with John Walsh. He came out. Podcast, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to on podcasts or done countless interviews with anybody to just get the information out there.
Did you participate in any of the searches that were done?
I did not.
Okay, why not?
I couldn't. Family did. I was just,
Do you have that same fear that you had on November 26th?
I think so. It was, I was living somebody's nightmare. And at that point, I didn't know what end was up. So to go out and participate in public, and no offense to media, but I was nowhere ready to face anybody with a camera or a microphone.
Now, there was testimony regarding Alexander calling 911 on that day that he was with John and, you know, felt scared or alone, or that
Right.
he couldn't find his dad when both of them had been in the house the whole time. So did you teach your kids about 911?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we, you know, along with your ABCs and your 1, 2, 3s and your address and your name and who's your mom and who's your dad And, you know, you learn about, that was just an automatic mom thing. You teach them about 911. And like I said, Alex was fascinated with phones anyway. So am I surprised that he's the one that would have done something like that? No. He was my very vocal child.
Okay. And do you believe that if your sons were out there and had the opportunity to call 911 in the past 15 years, they would have?
Definitely.
And you heard the testimony today from all of the law enforcement personnel that the boys hadn't been heard from or seen since November 26, 2010, correct?
Correct.
Does that lead you to believe as well that the boys are deceased?
Yes.
I have nothing further. Thank you.
If you're comfortable, I'd like to hear a little bit about the dynamics between you and John. What that environment was like. And if you're not comfortable enough to share, I understand.
I thought we were in a happy marriage. I mean, couples have problems, they have fights. He had at one point mentioned that he would like to move to Florida, or at least go down there and try to look for a job. And I said to him, I said, we can't just uproot and move to Florida. School just started, there's processes. You know, when are you thinking you want to do this? And this was like the weekend before he took them to Florida. And he said, well, you know, in a couple months or whatever. And I said, you know, because of my criminal past, there are things that I have to look into before I can just up and move. I can't just, you know, you have to find out. And I said, I can make those phone calls on Monday and say, what do I have to do to move? Apprehensive about it. Orange is a small town. Everybody there knew what I had done. I had paid my time. I was welcomed back into the community. Going somewhere new where nobody knows me. You know, I think ultimately that was John Skelton's goal, was to get me where I didn't have family and friends and I had to rely on him. So when I got the phone call from the school, I was completely shocked because I was like we all went to bed at the same time last night in the house, and he was supposedly going to work, but apparently he left but didn't go to work because he came back and took the boys from school and just.
Did you feel at other times as though there was an attempt to isolate or create a situation where you were dependent on him?
He was very jealous of any relationship that I had with, whether it was my parents, my siblings, my children, my daughters, my sons, friends. And I find out after the fact, the whole cafe mom thing, he was very jealous of that. He had gone through a divorce with his first wife, and she came and got custody of his daughter. So he lost his daughter, and I never wanted to have that be something between us, but I think that I don't even know where his mind was or what. It's like he became somebody different overnight.
Was there ever any other time that he had done something sort of just rash and impulsive that you couldn't necessarily explain?
Not really that I can think of, other, I mean, he liked to drink and like binge drink, and then he was, I don't even know how to explain it. In looking back, he was all about himself, and it was his needs and wants before anybody else's, and just he was on the road a lot with the truck. So a lot of times I felt like I was a single mom anyways, because he was gone for days at a time. So the boys and I had a routine. And then he would come home and things would be good for a couple days when he was home, and then I don't know if it was insecurities or, but for the most part, we went camping, we soccer, we always outside playing. He was building a treehouse in the backyard for the boys and kind of starting to teach them about building and making cuts and using a hammer, and then it was like one day this switch flipped and just became somebody that none of us recognized.
Thank you for answering my questions.
Welcome.
Any questions based on my questions, counselors?
Oh, yeah.
No, thank you.
Any other questions?
Oh, yeah.
No,
Thank you so much for your testimony. All right, Mr. Castleberry, any other witnesses for today?
No, Your Honor, the petitioner rests.
Ms. Stang, do you anticipate any witnesses?
No, I have no witnesses. Thank you.
Right. Are you prepared to proceed with closings, or would you
I am.
like to?
I am.
All right, yes. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Your Honor, we've been here since basically 9 o'clock this morning. I'm not gonna insult the court's intelligence and summarize everything that happened here today. And it's all in one day, which is actually good for the memory. Obviously, there are some things on the timeline that was entered that I do think is important for the court to consider. However, I think what is really important is that the petitioner in this matter is Ms. Zuvers. She spent the past 14 plus years mourning her missing children. Every day since November 26, 2010, she has hoped and prayed that her children would return alive and safe. We just heard her testify that she had to come to grips with the fact that that's not going to happen. She knows that they're dead. She knows that they died on or about November 26, 2010. She has prayed this whole time that her heart would heal and someone would provide information on their whereabouts, even though she knew they weren't alive. She's hoped beyond all hope that the last person to see them alive, John Skelton, would offer any plausible explanation. He didn't even bother to show up today. He doesn't want any part of anything to do with these children because he murdered them. And he murdered them on or about November 26, 2010. It's time that we declare these children dead. The Michigan legislature contemplated situations like this, which is why this morning when I started off, I read you a statute. And it talked about the presumption of death. There's no doubt that these children are presumed to be dead, but you've heard today from the Morenci Police Department, you've heard from the Michigan State Police, you've heard from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, you've heard from an expert on proof of life. And most importantly, you've heard from the mother of these children, and everybody told you the same thing. The evidence is clear. These children were murdered at the hands of John Skelton on November 26, 2010. I feel that we have proven this beyond clear and convincing evidence for sure, definitely sufficient evidence. And I am asking that the court enter an order giving these children what they deserve, which is a date of death, a death certificate, and some closure for this family to end this nightmare. Although we know it'll never recover, they'll never recover from this. They do deserve this justice. Thank you.
In a typical case before this court, during this hearing, I would have been sitting at this table with my clients. However, as you have observed, I have been sitting at that table alone. And I've been sitting there on behalf of Andrew Alexander and Tanner Skelton, who could not be here today with us because they are deceased. This is not a typical case. It's both a unique and chilling experience as an attorney to have 3 clients that I've never had the opportunity to meet or speak with and will never have that opportunity. Based on the overwhelming amount of evidence that has been presented in this matter, and on behalf of my clients, Andrew Alexander and Tanner Skelton, I am joining in the petitioner's request to have these 3 boys declared deceased and a finding that they have been deceased since on or about November 26th of 2010. Although I never got to meet any of my clients, I know that if they had been given to some unknown group or person, like John Skelton alleged over the years that the children had been given to, or were anywhere out there at any point after November 26th of 2010, at some point, those boys would have found a way to make contact with someone to let them know that they were scared and that they weren't where they were supposed to be. How do I know this? I know this because on November 21st, 2010, just 5 days before the boys would never be heard from or seen again, 7-year-old Alexander Skelton made that phone call that you heard testimony about today to the police while he was at his father's home because he was scared when he couldn't find his father, John Skelton. It turned out that John Skelton was just upstairs in the home, but 7-year-old Alexander knew to call 911 because he felt scared and couldn't find the person that he looked up to and that he knew was responsible for caring for him or was supposed to be. Tanya Zuvers also testified to the boys' intelligence and ability to call 911 or give someone their address or even their mom's phone number. This evidence shows that Alexander Skelton knew to call 911 whenever he felt that he needed help. I don't need to go back through all of the evidence that was put on today. We all heard it. The evidence and testimony that has been put on during this hearing, which hundreds of law enforcement agencies have been involved in over the last 15 years, shows you that there is no doubt in any reasonable person's mind that these boys are alive. Or not alive, sorry. As you have heard through the testimony today, the Morenci Police Department, the Michigan State Police, the FBI, Andrew Alexander and Tanner Skelton's mother, and I too am convinced that these boys have been deceased since on or about November 26th of 2015. I am hoping that you too, Judge, are convinced of the same. And I am respectfully requesting under MCL 700.1208 on behalf of the 3 boys who were taken from this world far too young, that you make a finding that they are deceased and have been since that date. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like an opportunity to finish reading through the exhibits and the slides that were provided today and to think over everything that I've been able to listen to today and review the file. But I also don't want to make you wait very much longer for an answer. So what I would like to do is ask everyone, if you would, to come back on Wednesday, the 5th. This trial was scheduled previously for all 3 days. So if I take tomorrow, that gives me enough time to review everything and to prepare the order. And I'll give you the opinion and order on Wednesday, the 5th at 9 a.m. if you'd like to be. You're also welcome to join us by Zoom if you'd like to exercise that option.